It's a glowing evening in late August. The heat of summer is wearing off. Football is back on television, and your Facebook feed is filled with your friends' kids in their back-to-school pictures. But that's not why you're so excited. You're excited because of what day it is. Walking through the door of the Anselm Society Digital Pub, you see 3 tables filled with some of the most interesting people in history. That's right. It's Fantasy Pub Table Day, the 3rd annual Fantasy Pub Table extravaganza. And also at these 3 tables, you see 3 people at the end of them. They're maybe not super famous yet, but they're still having a good time. One of them is me, your host, Matt Mellema. And welcome to Believe to See, a podcast of the St. Anselm Society Arts Guild. St. Anselm Society is a coalition of churches throughout the Front Range of Colorado dedicated merely to a renaissance of the Christian imagination. So we have different programs, projects, different exciting things going on all the time. We have a major conference each April and things going all year round. So if you want to find out a little bit about us, why don't you go to anselmsociety.org. You can also check out our 2 other sister podcasts there. And while you're at it, maybe you want to be a patron of Believe to See. Maybe throw us some money so we can, increase the show budget. Go to, I don't know what we do with the show budget yet, but we'd figure something out to do with it. And while you're at it, just rate and review us on iTunes. I think it'd be cool, whatever. But that's not why we're here. Well, you should do it, but that's not why we're here. Why we're here, guys, I'm very excited for this. It is the 3rd annual Fantasy Pub Table, and joining me this year, we have 2 Anselm Society artists, 2 Anselm writers, to be precise. It's Mandy, Houk, and Amy Lee. How are you 2 doing?
Great.
Good.
Yeah, I'm excited. I've been studying and choosing people that I don't think you'll be able to figure it out so you can't steal them. It's very important.
Yeah, she actually has a whole list with it's printed off. There's notes written on it. I'm trying to see what's written on the notes so I can steal her people.
He is. He's been trying to peek.
No success yet. So maybe, but before we get going, I should probably explain the rules for those of you who haven't been listening. If you haven't, go back in time.
Yeah.
Each late August, we try to do these. So there are 2 prior ones. But the rules kept them pretty much the same. So here's the scenario. You are at a pub table in, say, the Anselm Society Digital Pub. And as anyone knows, a pub table has room for 6 people. So we are one of the people. And the other 5 slots can be taken up by anyone in history with a few rules. I like rules, so I have some. First of all, this is sort of like, if any of you are familiar with fantasy football, fantasy baseball, any of that, once a player gets selected, once a table sitter,
selected.
Once they get selected, they're gone. So you can't have 2 people with C.S. Lewis. So if you want him, you better take him quick before he gets stolen, because I will steal someone if I think you want them.
Yeah.
Rule number 2, these people can be from any time or place and speak any language. So if you want Socrates, you can't be oh, but I can't bring him because I don't speak ancient Greek. It's okay. We'll assume we have one of those babble fish from Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, and we can all understand each other.
Okay.
Or it can be like Pocahontas when she just magically learns to... Do you remember that?
Yeah,
That's true.
I just bought it when I was a kid, but that doesn't make any sense.
No, it really does not.
That didn't occur to me until this moment, so yes.
Yeah.
Oh.
Anyway. So, sort of a subset of this rule. This isn't really a rule, but it's a strong recommendation. I recommend the person should be dead because I think it's more interesting if we're surrounded by ghosts or whatever. They can be alive. There's no technical rule, but I'll look down on it.
Yes. Oh, we're aware.
Number 3, no people featured in the Bible. And the reason for this is simple. We would all pick Jesus, of course, and that is what we should do, but that would mean we all have the same table. And the purpose of this is to have an interesting conversation about people. So if you are featured in the Bible, you cannot be selected. Same goes for founders of major religions. So if you really want the Buddha or Muhammad, I'm sorry, they are not eligible either for similar reasons. And if you want to do Confucius, isn't there some debate about whether Confucianism is a religion or a philosophy?
Yes, I've heard that
Okay.
debate. I have no opinion on it, but...
Well, if one of you wants to take Confucius. I don't know. He's not on my list, but okay. Well,
Confucius passes.
I don't know. We would have a pretty fierce debate. But we'll set that on the side for now.
Burner.
Yeah. But sort of related to this, it has to be a real person, so don't get all cutesy and take like, oh, I'm taking Kramer from Seinfeld. No, Kramer's not eligible. It has to be a real person.
I don't think he'd be a very good pub table guest anyway, frankly. But
I respectfully disagree. Do you remember that episode from the last season when he gets all the stuff from the Merv Griffin set and hosts a talk show?
Oh, that is true. Okay, that is true. You've put me in my place.
Now, again, if you wanted to select like King Arthur, we could have a good debate because there's topic, is he based on a historical figure? Is he completely fictitious? Right. I mean, do either of you have King Arthur on your list? We could hash it out now.
I am not giving you any hints at all.
Okay, well.
No, I don't.
And the final rule is that we have to pick a cool name for our pub table ahead of time. I would like this to reflect something about the essence of the table. So I would like to start with you, Mandy. Do you have a name for your table?
I do, and I'm not telling you because I know you.
That's in one of the rules. One of the rules is rule number 4 in the email I sent you. Come up with a cool name for your table ahead of time.
And she
did. I came up with it ahead of time, but I'm not telling you ahead of time. Oh, if that was your rule, you did not phrase it well enough. I'm not. No. We're not sharing them ahead of time.
No, you're right. It was poorly drafted.
All
okay.
Right, there you go.
You're right. You win. Amy?
Yes.
Because of the way this is drafted, you are under no obligation to share it, but
I'll slip through the loophole too then. Matt's got his head in his hands. Mostly because when I was looking at the people that I scribbled onto my list, I started noticing the pattern after the 4th person, and I was going to ask you if you guys would like to figure it out. Or if you would like me to tell you right away.
That makes for an interesting problem.
Okay, well we'll guess the pattern. That sounds fair enough. Good. Okay, so now that that's all set, I broke my own rule because I don't have a name for my team picked out yet.
We will all confirm.
I was trying. So now that the ground rules are all set. By the way, we want to figure out, I haven't figured out the best voting mechanism, but the point of this, as in any activity in life, is to win. So we are all picking our teams for our own, edification and benefit and, all that. But also I want to convince you, the listener, our fellow Artist Guild artists, that my table is the best. And like I said, I haven't figured out the voting mechanism, but that's in the wings. So keep a lookout for that. Okay, so I also want to say a brief word about the voting process. We're doing something. Are either of you familiar with fantasy football?
Yes, I actually had a winning fantasy football team several years ago.
Okay, what was the name of the team?
The name of the team was Mama's Boys, because I was the only woman.
That's nice.
Yeah.
I approve.
Well, speaking of nice, it's because I would not draft any jerks, which is very limiting when you're talking about the NFL.
That takes a lot of players off the table.
I know, but I won.
Yes. So there you go. Nice. There you go. So I have had the same fantasy football team name since I was in 7th grade.
What is that?
It was a league founded by me and my brother and my buddy when I was in middle school. We still have it going on. Okay. And the name of that team is the Homicidal Psycho Jungle Cats.
Wow.
It's named after a collection of Calvin and Hobbes comics.
Oh, I love Calvin and Hobbes.
But
if I could have a fictional person at my table, I would have Calvin. Or no, probably Hobbes.
I think Hobbes would be a better conversationalist.
Yeah. Well, Calvin and Hobbes.
There you go.
Yeah.
I feel like Calvin would be better. We're giving away stuff now. But anyway, so those of you familiar with fantasy football, it's a serpentine draft. So team 1.
So whoever is second gets the shaft because.
It's supposed to be fair.
Yes.
So let's say, hypothetically, Amy picks first,
right.
I pick second, and Mandy picks third.
Yes.
So then that's the first round. Then the second round go Mandy, me, Amy. Then Amy, me, Mandy. So it looks like a snake.
Yes.
So that's the idea. So that is supposed to be fair. That way Amy doesn't get an advantage because she's picking first.
Correct.
Okay. Now that that's all set, let's actually call this meeting of the 3rd annual Fantasy Pub Table Draft to order. And let's get some sort of... I don't have a bell. if our producers have like a bell or a gavel or a gong.
I have a Sharpie. That is very weak.
So let's pretend that's a gavel. If the producers want to add a gong or something, that would be awesome. I don't know how possible that is. So, with the first pick in the first round of the 2019 Anselm Society Fantasy Pub Table Draft, Amy Lee selects. If you want to ramp up to it, you can do that.
Okay, I'm scrolling now. Okay, first person at my table would be, and I hope I get the pronunciation right on this, Betsy Tenboom.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
I nod along, implying that I've heard of her.
Uh-huh.
Okay, so
is that Corey Tenboom's sister?
Yes, that's Corey Tenboom's
Oh,
sister.
that's how it sounded familiar.
Yes.
Okay, so you're getting the second most famous Tenboom, so that's interesting.
Mm-hmm. Yes. So, have you heard of the book The Hiding Place?
I have.
Have you read it?
I have not read it. I've seen a play adaptation of it.
Okay.
So I have some background knowledge, not a whole lot.
Yeah. The Hiding Place was a book that I read in high school.
Mm-hmm.
Corey Tenboom wrote it with, I think, John and Elizabeth Sherrill. But Betsy was her sister. And a lot of The Hiding Place is about how the Tenboom family used to shelter Jews during the Holocaust. And then many of the family members were sent to prison or concentration camps because of it. And Betsy was the one who always, I've read it several times now, and every time I'm just kind of staggered by the enormity of Betsy's faith, but also the way that she expressed it and the way that she tended toward beauty in her homekeeping, but also it didn't stop her in prison and it didn't stop her in the concentration camp. And the way that the love of Christ expressed itself through her was through care and compassion and beauty. And so she's kind of, I don't know that she's the anchor of my table, but I think you'll start seeing a pattern.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. So Corey became more famous because she
wrote the book.
Yes.
And,
okay.
Oh, and lived.
Yeah.
And wasn't there something specific about Betsy and the lice? She was grateful for the lice.
The fleas.
The fleas.
Yeah. Well,
because it kept the guards away.
Out of the barracks. And
the barracks they were in,
camp.
they had fleas.
Mm-hmm. So she
but
got
Betsy
to hold
was
a Bible
grateful
study.
for them.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
But she was grateful for them before she knew that would
be the
turn
purpose.
out that way. Yeah.
Wow.
And there's a lot of stories like that where, my
that is a
response
book that is
literally
on.
like, wow.
That is one of those books that is on my shelf that I have intended to read for years, and I'm always embarrassed to admit I didn't, but I have not, but I shall.
Sounds good.
Okay. So what do we know about her as like a conversationalist? Like, was she a talkative person? Was she a little bit more introverted?
How to draw people out of their shells. So there's one story that I love about her. Wow, I could go on forever, but there's one story that I love about her where I think this was, I don't know, however many waves of refugees and that came in through their doors, and one of them was a very timid, shy Jewish lady, I think, and she was kind of sitting at the table. She had just gotten there, and then Betsy at the end of the meal jumped up and said, well, it's time to, clean up, and she started clearing away the dishes, and she looked at the lady and said, would you help me? And Corey was stunned because, number one, Betsy didn't like people meddling in the housework, or not meddling, but like she preferred to take care of those things herself.
Right.
But it's like she read the situation and the person and knew that this was the way to make her feel most comfortable.
Oh, that's excellent.
So the lady jumped to her feet and started helping to gather things. And I don't know, I think there are little clues throughout the book that tell you that she had, I don't know if you would say that it was social finesse, but I think it was more of an insight into the people that she was choosing to love who were in front of her at the time.
Oh, that's excellent.
Yeah.
Okay. Good, solid introduction.
Thank you.
The pressure is on.
Well, so what I'm going to do, I have my list of people, and I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to take from my list of people the one I think Mandy is most likely to select.
Dang it!
In hopes that I steal someone from her.
That's why you're making me third.
That's the only reason I made you third.
I know.
I wanted to give us each a chance to steal your person from you.
Thank you. I also think this is why we only have 3 people, because you want to up your chances of winning. You're increasing your odds.
Not a bad. Yeah, there you go.
Yeah. All
There
right,
you
go
go.
for it.
Okay, so my strategy here I'll have to do some explaining to this person, but Person I'm selecting is Fred Rogers.
Oh, I love him, but I didn't think of choosing him. Oh, yeah. I would have if I thought of it.
Yeah, so a little bit of explanation why.
I actually appreciate that you think I would have chosen him. I'm flattered.
Oh, good. Wow, you turn my little sinister plan into like a compliment. That's really impressive.
Welcome. Thank you.
So Fred Rogers, of course, we're talking about Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, which I assume everyone has seen because, I mean, come on. But a couple things have been, having Fred Rogers on the brain recently. I think this past year was some big anniversary. I'm not quite sure what.
Well, they released a movie about him, which I own, if you would like to borrow it.
So that is actually part of it. I think there was like some anniversary with when his show went off the air, the anniversary of his death, something like that. For whatever reason, Fred Rogers was in the culture a lot recently.
Yes.
So I've been, doing some reading on him, saw a lot of think pieces about him. Like Russell Moore had a good piece about him that was interesting. But what really got me going was the documentary, Won't You Be My Neighbor?
Yeah.
Absolutely fantastic.
Yep.
I loved it.
Mm-hmm. I pre-ordered it as soon as I came home from the theater. And so I own it. It's upstairs.
Oh, good.
Oh,
and
that's the movie that you're talking about.
Yes,
but there's another one coming out.
The one with Tom Hanks playing him, I'm a little queasy about.
So let's hold that back and discuss this at the end of this because
okay.
I want to discuss that because I share your opinion.
Thank you.
So yes, this documentary, Won't You Be My Neighbor, I thought it was great in a lot of ways. But one of the things that it really showcased to me was how thoughtful he was in the work that he did.
Yes.
It had a lot of old footage of him. There was one bit of footage when he was very, very young, the show had first started. And he's just sort of, fiddling around with the piano and the camera's on him. And it's not like a TV show spot. It almost looks like one of his buddies just has a camera and pulls it out.
Right.
And he's talking about how his goal is to help children navigate the difficult in-between parts in life. And he compared it to the trying to connect different strains of music.
Yes.
And you just see that throughout where it just came out that he cared so deeply about the children in his audience. Mm-hmm. He was an ordained Presbyterian minister. He truly seemed to view this as his calling to minister to the kids in this way. And you can just see how thoughtful it was, how really bold it was in a lot of ways. Mm-hmm. There's stories about how he introduced the first recurring African-American character on a kids' TV show and went out of his way to have a scene where they're, in a swimming pool together when this was during the desegregation fights and there was all these attempts to keep swimming pools segregated, which, at the time that was a very bold thing that he did.
Oh, yeah.
And one of the very first episodes he did was teaching kids about assassinations because it was after Robert Kennedy's assassination.
Right. Oh, wow. Teaching them what it meant.
Yeah, so it's just... especially for somebody who has a reputation for being kind of meek and mild. He was very bold and not afraid to give the children all the straight truth. Yeah.
Well, I actually think he is the true definition of meek because meek I think this is correct. I've been told that meek is actually the term for breaking a horse. So it's strength under control. You meek a horse. So the culture, when we talk about meek, we equate it with weakness and wimpiness, but no, actually it's strength that doesn't have to shout, and that's exactly what he was. And now I'm advertising for your table.
Aha!
Dang it!
Amy, if you want to say nice things about the table, you can too.
Well done. I was just going to say,
or do you
I'm surprised
want to
that you think you need to offer an explanation for why you chose Fred Rogers.
I know. I think
if you choose not to say nice things about Fred Rogers, that's your choice. But whatever.
How do I say nice things about Fred Rogers without endorsing the table?
He's got us. Dang it. Shoot.
Okay, well, she's refusing to say more nice things. Let the record show.
Okay, I'll just concur with everything that.
Okay, but something else that stuck out to me because. My oldest, he's 3.5. So he has his shows, he super loves Daniel Tiger, which is, sort of in that tradition. But for a while, one of the streaming services we had some old Mr. Rogers episodes. So we played it, and I was a little anxious, will kids these days still go for Mr. Rogers? And he was just transfixed the entire time.
Yeah.
So it was really great to see. And the show was about death. I mean, the premise of the show is...
I remember that one.
Yeah, the premise of the show is one of Mr. Rogers' fish dies.
Yes.
So he takes him out and explains death and, buries the goldfish, talks about, when his beloved pet dog died when he was a kid, and it was like, gosh, you don't see that in kid shows.
No.
But I think he is basically the model of what all of us as Christian artists should strive to be in terms of how we view our audience, view our work, and the care and thought we put into it. Mm-hmm. And also, I just think he'd be a great conversationalist. He's somebody who, when you see like the different people he'd have on, how interested he was in how people make, baseball bats or whatever.
Right. Those are always my favorite parts. The factory segments.
Yeah, he was always very interested in these, seemingly random things. So I feel like put him at a table with interesting people. Mm-hmm. He could be genuinely interested and draw out all the people there.
But could you find somebody to get him to talk?
Oh, just wait. Just wait.
What if I take that person? Is it my turn?
It's your turn.
All right. Well, none of you took her. I didn't say the pronoun before because I didn't want to narrow it down. So
I would have picked one of the women on my table if I would have known that. But anyway, keep going.
I know. That's why I didn't say. Okay, so here's hoping that I'm choosing one of your women. I am choosing the delightful, sassy, brilliant Dorothy Sayers.
She was on my maybe list. I was going back and forth on putting her on for a while.
Yeah, well, Dorothy Sayers is sort of she was, over the past few weeks since you invited Amy and me to be a part of this, she was my only constant. Everyone else was in flux.
Okay.
Well, to be fair, I was going to do Flannery O'Connor because I absolutely adore Flannery O'Connor, but I thought you would know I would do Flannery O'Connor because everyone knows I love her. And actually, also Marcus had her in the first.
Yeah, she was picked in year one. Now, there's no rule against repeats, but
right.
I mean, come on. I know. We'd all say something.
I know.
Yeah.
So anyway, but Dorothy Sayers, I actually thought Dorothy Sayers and Flannery O'Connor would be a fun combo. But they might not talk to anyone else because they would enjoy each other too much. But anyway, so Dorothy Sayers, of course, is famous for her detective fiction.
Little whimsy.
Yes, but what I particularly love about her are her books Letters to a Diminished Church and Mind of the Maker, and just her essays and her thoughtfulness about what it means to be made in the image of God. Her position really is, it's in a lot of her nonfiction, but particularly in Mind of the Maker, it's her position that the way that we are most keenly made in the image of God is in our creative impulses. And that does not rule out non-artistic people. It's in any kind of creative impulse we have, whether it's a relationship with someone or parenting or any trade. But of course, I most identify with that as creatives. And it really, just reading her work really reminds me that this creative work I do is not frivolous and it's not futile. It's an expression of the fact that I was made in the image of God, and that creative impulse is something that he put in me. One of the quotes that I love that she said is, "The only Christian work is good work. Well done." And I love that. But one thing that I really love about her is her fascination with Dante.
Yes.
She taught herself Old Italian. That's right.
Oh, gosh.
Taught herself so that she could translate Dante's Divine Comedy. And it's widely regarded as one. I mean, there are so many, so I'm sure I don't think it's universal that people think hers is the best, but I love it.
Hers is the only one. It's in verse.
Yes.
So, I mean, Dante, the rhyme scheme from the Italian, it's...
Right.
Most people are like, it's impossible to do this in English because English doesn't have enough rhyming words.
Right.
But she friggin' did it.
Longfellow did it too, didn't he? But I think hers was better, like Longfellow's. But anyway. But here's a little known fact about Dorothy Sayers that there is a little controversy about, shouldn't she have just been one of the Inklings? Maybe she would have been if she hadn't been a woman, and there's that whole aspect. But because she was friends with all of them. She was really good friends with all of them. But here's a little known fact about her. When she was 30 years old, she had been spurned by her one true love because he did not want to ever get married, and she wanted to get married. And she went through this depressive rebound, and she actually had an illegitimate son at the age of 30. And yes, It's her only child she ever had. He was raised by her cousin and her aunt, who ran a foster home, so it was pretty convenient. Nobody really knew where this child came from. And then when she did get married a few years later, she and her husband adopted the son. It's unclear, based on sources, if the son ever knew, if he ever found out, or if he did, how old he was if he found out that he was her biological son. But just the fact that she, in that time period, that was 1923, I believe, is when she had the son. In that time period, you would think, particularly because of her ties with the Anglican Church, that she could have let that stop her, shame her, but she continued and experienced the grace of God and continued to do the work he called her to do through that period. So
now, if I remember right, I think there's sort of this story arc in the Lord Peter Wimsey novels where one of the characters who, spoiler alert, he later marries is based off of her.
Yes.
So like when they find her, she's like involved in this murder plot with this like author. She's, whatever.
Yes, there's a lot of speculation that you can see sort of the echoes of her experience with the man that spurned her and her choices and all these things.
Wow. Now, I have some thoughts, but Amy, if you have some thoughts, maybe yours would be more I used apropos wrongly. One of the things I love doing the most to just be so insufferable is a lot of people use apropos as meaning appropriate. Right. No, apropos means as a result of. So if someone says, oh, that's so apropos, blah, blah, blah. No, you're wrong. Anyway, Amy.
Well, I'm not sure I want to try to say anything after that. No, you go ahead. I actually don't know that much about Sayers, so this is fascinating to me.
Here's one of the things about Sayers. So I'm a detective fiction fan, so of course I've come across Sayers.
Right.
And I really enjoy her mystery novels on the whole. Yeah. I think the solutions she comes up with are very clever. She's an extremely talented writer. But Lord Peter Wimsey has a lot of good quality. He's like this aristocratic, like Etonian Oxford guy who's like very highborn, and he's very whimsical, this sparkling wit, and he's always in a good mood. Whimsy, exactly. And he's always making all these arcane, like literary references and puns as he talks.
Right.
I started re-listening to one of those books again. I was like, this guy is insufferable. I like the book. Peter, shut up and solve the friggin' mystery.
I did not invite Lord Peter Wimsey to my table,
but he's sprung from the mind of Dorothy Sayers. So don't you think you get Dorothy Sayers down at the pub table, get a couple drinks in her, Peter Wimsey comes out.
No. Yeah. Oh my gosh! If I were like all of my characters.
No. That's a modern usage. Then.
Oh, she just burned him and looked up apropos.
One of the alternate definitions is appropriate. No, that's a no.
The primary definition for the adjective form is very appropriate to a particular situation.
Is that one of those things where they changed the word to suit the mistakes that we've been all making?
They changed the word as we were speaking, just to burn Matt.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Amy.
Whether it's apropos or not. I see what you're saying, but I don't know. I mean, if you really think about your fictional characters, I think my fictional characters as a writer, they come from certain parts of me, but I don't think I am them. Mm-hmm. So I would not. Have you read her nonfiction, Letters to a Diminished Church or Mind of the Maker?
I have not, or if I have, it's just been in little snippets.
Okay. Because just the way that she speaks, she's so bold and just articulate, much more articulate than I am right now. I don't think she would be saying as much. But I should have brought down another one of her quotes.
So allow me to further concern troll.
Okay.
For a lot of my characters, like I'm writing this character right now who's sort of in the Peter Wimsey-ish vein, not quite that much, but a little in that direction.
Okay.
And I noticed there's this little part within myself. When I'm writing him, I just sort of take that little part, like, hey, you run wild. You just do your thing. You do your, so it's this little part of me. Wouldn't usually come up in a, formal company, but he's there somewhere.
Right.
So there's a little Lord Peter Wimsey running around the brain of Dorothy Sayers. And in certain situations, he's coming out. Might be this one. Hashtag just saying. I don't know.
All right. Well, here's a really good quote that's not really...
Okay.
Just this is the kind of thing that she said that I don't think Lord Peter Wimsey would say. Time and trouble will tame an advanced young woman, but an advanced old woman is uncontrollable by any earthly force. That's the Dorothy Sayers that I've invited.
That's the sort of stuff going on at your pub table.
That is.
Okay.
Yes.
All right.
Untamed.
So, since we're doing the Serpentine draft now, you actually get 2 picks. So this is pick number 2.
Oh my goodness.
With the first pick in the second round of the 2019 Anselm Society Fantasy Pub Table Draft.
Yes.
Mandy Houk selects.
All right. I am going to choose Fanny Crosby.
Oh.
Are we familiar
Okay.
with Fanny Crosby? Yes. One of the reasons I like her is because, well, same with Dorothy Sayers. They wrapped around 2 centuries because they were both born in the 19th century but passed away in the 20th. So Fanny Crosby, for listeners for whom she sounds familiar but you're not sure, she wrote lots of poetry books. She's mostly known for her hymns, but prior to writing any hymns, she had already written 3 poetry books. She also taught rhetoric and ancient history at the Institute for the Blind, and then she wrote so many hymns that she had over 200 pseudonyms, because she didn't want her name to fill up all the hymnals. She wrote over 900 hymns. She was American, and she had memorized nearly the entire Bible before she'd even become an adult. And she was blind. I don't know if you got... I knew she was blind, but I didn't know how she became blind. This is horrible. At 6 weeks old, she was ill, and there was this, quack doctor, snake oil salesman guy going around, and he told her parents to put hot mustard on her eyes. Oh my gosh. So obviously that did not cure her. It instead made her blind. But when she was asked, because she would be asked often, people would say, oh, it's just too bad the Lord didn't give you sight. And she would always say that if she could have chosen at birth, she would have chosen to have been blind from birth, so that the very first face she would ever see would be her Savior. Yeah. So some of the hymns she's famous for are Blessed Assurance. Now I can't remember the other ones. But anyway, lots of them. The reason that I love her is because she's someone who didn't let her circumstances stop her. Mm-hmm. She was just this creative force. And a lot of her hymns are the melodies are very simple, mm-hmm. but she actually could compose much more complex pieces of music and did so, and even could improvise it. But her intent was that the beauty and simplicity of the music would carry the truth into the listeners and singers of those hymns. Mm-hmm. And so I just love that her purpose was not to show off necessarily, but her purpose for the beauty was to convey truth and to sink it into the hearts of the singers.
Okay. So what do we know about her personality then?
Her personality? Well, taken from her response to people when they would tell her, oh, don't you wish God had given you sight? The fact that she just was so plain and honest but wasn't shaming them mm-hmm. for their question. Mm-hmm. I love that. Yeah. Also, to me, the fact that she taught rhetoric and ancient history tells me that she was very well spoken and educated. Mm-hmm. Her kind of tenacity in seeking out the Lord and seeking out the opportunity to teach about him through her art and through the gifts she was given, I think that tells you a lot.
Yeah. Okay.
Do you not have any criticisms? I'm bracing myself.
No, I mean, I'll admit I know generally of Fanny Crosby. Yeah. She was in an episode of Adventures in Odyssey that I listened to as a kid. She seemed like a very good person in that episode, yeah. So I don't know. Yeah. I can't. And she actually was still writing poetry all the way up until she died, which was just a few weeks before she turned 95.
Wow.
So she was kind of a force.
Yeah. Oh, man.
To be reckoned with.
Oh, man. So, Amy, your turn to tell us why that would be a bad pick.
Oh, darn. Crickets.
You can tell him why it would be a good pick.
Well,
you have freedom.
No, now I'm curious to see who else is going to be at this table. And now I'm thinking I might have more overlap with you than I thought.
Oh.
So I have to think about this.
Oh, good. Well, in that case, pick the one in your upcoming pick that you think is going to be one of Mandy's.
Yeah, that'll be hard. But, yeah, no, it also did occur to me that there might be people at my pub table and now hers who won't be drinking.
Oh, yes. I did.
Wait, was she a teetotaler?
I don't know. I think the assumption is pretty good, but you can order tea at a pub. I would think Dorothy
what was
would
her?
drink.
I would think so.
Dorothy drank. She
I mean,
friends with Charles Williams. And
She was an Anglican in England, of course.
Yeah.
Come on. But okay, so Fanny.
But I don't think Fanny would shame anyone else for
When
drinking.
did she live?
She lived 1820 to 1915.
Did she have like a denomination she was a part of?
Methodist.
Oh, there's a good chance she's a teetotaler then.
Well, but
Maybe medicinally.
Welsh's grape
Yeah.
juice was invented by a Methodist who decided,
I
you know
didn't know
what?
that.
This wine we've been using all these years.
well, then Fanny is
Wow.
drinking Welch's grape juice.
Okay.
There you go.
I guarantee she won't order mustard on anything.
Oh.
Sorry, that was a terrible joke. Edit that out.
All right, so Fanny Crosby, now we're going back to my table. And my table, I'm going with the one, the only, Langston Hughes.
Oh,
Okay.
that's good.
So I've known
Dream deferred.
of Langston Hughes for a while. He's one of those writers who's generally on the syllabus. So
Yeah.
like he was on one of my college syllabi.
Syllabi.
Yes. And so a couple things stuck out to me about Langston Hughes. So one, he's lived 1902, 1965, African-American writer. I think he's part of the Harlem Renaissance literary movement.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
I liked it because even though I'm this nerdy white guy who lives 100 years later, I found a lot in his poetry that resonated with me. And some people in their poetry can write words that just sort of vibrate together. They just dance. And he can do that. There's one, I think it's called The Blues. And there's this one line in it. And it's just stuck in my head. I read it in college. It was by the pale, dull pallor of the old gaslight. It was
oh, yeah.
Oh, that's beautiful. That's perfect. Those are perfect words there. So that was sort of going on in general. And a few years ago, I came across this article in Gospel Coalition by John Mark Reynolds, who's known as he's head of Houston Baptist, and he's known as in the conservative camp. But he wrote a post saying that Langston Hughes is, quote, is the greatest American literary talent, poet, essayist, short story author, and novelist. So not only just a great writer, the greatest American literary talent, period. So it's
Wow.
Okay. And he sort of goes on, I thought this article is really interesting. Again, and he's writing mainly to a sort of conservative audience who might be like, I don't know.
Yeah.
He was a communist after all. But here's one of the things he says about his short stories. If racism and race-based slavery was America's original sin, Hughes demonstrates that racism and the legacy of slavery were alive and killing us in the middle of the last century. Conservative Christians know that history matters, ideas have consequences, and the wages of continued sin keep being death. And while Hughes' African-American characters may be harmed by the ways of some white folk do not govern the real lives of black folk. And that was one of the things he goes on to say, is that these are stories of real people who they're not defined by a particular race, but they sort of inhabit this area in this very real world. And he just talk about his clear-sightedness into human nature, his observations about it. And then he talks about, gets into the communism in case some people are still concerned. Hughes's poetry and his short stories are full of allusions to Christianity. In his own life, Langston Hughes rejected Christianity and considered secular solutions, a few, like the Soviet Union, monstrously evil. Hughes's imagination, however, remained haunted by Christian images and ideas. If he died without Jesus, and who can be sure of such things, Hughes always had the story of Jesus in his mind and heart. So I just think he's a fascinating person. First of all, just an immense literary talent who has very strongly held views that not everyone at the table would agree with. I'm against the Soviet Union, just so it's clear.
Yeah.
But who I think seeing how he would form those views would be very interesting. And also, I think him and Fred Rogers would get along very well, actually.
Well, that's easy. Fred Rogers gets along with everyone.
I think him and Langston Hughes, well, maybe you should have picked him then.
I apparently should have.
I just think they have a lot of similar interests and see the world similarly in a lot of ways, even though they come from very different backgrounds. So I think they would get along swimmingly at the table, and Matt furthers his lead. Okay, Amy, back to you. Third pick in the second round.
Well, wait a minute. You didn't let us... Hey.
Oh, I'm sorry. You can try to cast aspersions against America's greatest writer.
I'm sitting over here with Google and failing, but I remember he had I was pretty sure... and I will have to bring it up later if I don't find it right away. I thought he had a pretty contentious, rivalry with the other members of the Harlem Renaissance.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Well, that's good. That means he's like a firebrand. A firebrand is what every pub table needs.
Oh, yeah. I'm like a walking Wikipedia right now. I just said that with no basis.
Like judo, I took your attack and flipped it into my attack. Okay.
Anyway, but that's just... I loved him. I didn't discover him until I was homeschooling my girls. I learned most of my education came from when I homeschooled my children. But yeah, so I do like him, but I just wonder about his combativeness. I see him as sulky.
Sulky.
Oh,
yeah.
interesting.
I need data on that. So I'm going to keep looking.
So in other words, you're saying you don't know that he's sulky, but you're assuming that he's sulky.
Well, you don't know that Fanny Crosby is a teetotaler. So there.
Well, fair enough.
Amy's just backing
Amy,
off.
if you could Google search Fanny Crosby teetotaler, exclamation question mark.
I'll get back to you on that.
All right. So, Amy, your second pick.
Mine?
So your third pick in the second round, Amy Lee selects
Joy Davidman.
Oh.
Ooh,
And
nice.
that's mostly to go along with Dorothy Sayers because she was number 3, but I just moved her up to number 2. For some of the obvious reasons, I guess. Not necessarily as a backdoor to getting to know the Inklings.
And if that was the case, you could just bring the Inklings on.
Well, I didn't know that till I got here. But Joy Davidman, and for a number of reasons, but I think the biggest one is going to be I would love to sit down and have a conversation with a woman who wrote this. She said, or wrote, I believed the three-dimensional material world was the only thing that existed, but in literature it bored me. I didn't believe in the supernatural, but it interested me above all else. Only it had to be written as fiction. The supernatural presented as fact outraged my convictions. By disguising heaven as fairyland, I was enabled to love heaven. There is a myth that has always haunted mankind, the legend of the way out. A stone, a leaf, an unfound door, wrote Thomas Wolfe, the door leading out of time and space into somewhere else. We all go out of that door eventually, calling it death. But the tale persists that for a few lucky ones the door has swung open before death, letting them through, perhaps for the week of fairy times, which is 7 long years on earth, or at least granting them a glimpse of the land on the other side. The symbol varies with different men. For some, the door itself is important, for others, the undiscovered country beyond it. The Never Never Land, St. Brendan's Island, the land of heart's desire. C.S. Lewis, whose Pilgrim's Regress taught me its meaning, calls it simply the island. Whatever we call it, it is more our home than any earthly country. So that, for me, just kind of nails down the fact that she would be a kindred spirit in that way, and I would love to sit down and have a conversation with her.
Okay. So, I guess one of my questions then would be, aren't you a little afraid of taking the person who stole C.S. Lewis away from the Inklings?
Oh,
Is that the gossip? That's the gossip.
is she like the Yoko Ono?
She is not the Yoko Ono of the Inklings.
Did I misread that part on Wikipedia?
No, what broke up the Inklings was more of Hugo Dyson, right? Being sick of the elves. I'm serious.
I don't think you
Have
can
you
go
read?
up against Amy on Inkling knowledge.
But, okay, so I don't know that I think I would quail before Joy Davidman, actually, because
Yeah.
I think she had that acerbic side to her, and that's probably what appealed to Lewis.
Oh,
that she could
totally.
keep
Oh,
up with him.
absolutely.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
also I think I remember reading some account of she and Lewis and some friends were at a pub or somewhere where there was a live band playing, and she spent the better part of maybe a half hour flicking little pieces of paper or napkin
Oh my
over
gosh,
at the
I
band.
love that. See, she's at home in a pub.
Yes. Well, there you go, right?
Oh, man.
The Dorothy Sayers, but yeah, so I don't know how that conversation would turn out. Betsy's already at the table, and then Joy. But
How do you think those two would get along? They seem to have very different personalities.
they do, but I'm relying on the graciousness that each one of them extended to their audience and the needy and the people
I
who were
think
with
Joy
them.
would have great respect for Betsy.
Oh.
Don't you think?
Hmm.
Because of the strength. I think Joy strikes me as someone who has respect for strength. And really, that's what Betsy...
Yeah. And it was the hidden kind, or not the hidden kind, but not the domineering
Right.
kind of strength. That's a good point.
I think Betsy and Fred Rogers should be at the same time.
I think there would be a lot of cross conversations.
They're all going to be in the
this
same pub.
room.
They can all talk to each other.
No one at my table's allowed to talk to any other tables.
Well, I have confession time. I just looked up. I got it backwards. Langston Hughes did not have a rivalry with someone else from the Harlem Renaissance. I was thinking of Zora Neale Hurston. It's the opposite. They were like absolute best buds. So never mind.
Oh, Langston Hughes and Zora Neale Hurston, they were best buds?
They were best buds. They were
There we
both.
go.
Their benefactor was Charlotte Mason. And
Okay.
So I was wrong. Yes, the
Charlotte
Yeah,
Mason. Oh my
yeah.
goodness, this is wow.
I know. I'm just helping him. I'm sorry.
Right.
But Joy,
No,
Joy.
going back to Joy. Joy needs to be at this table because
And she would not flick napkins at Sweet
she
Betsy.
knows. Because I love that. And then she wrote a poem called "The Fairy Tale," I think is what it was called, about this longing, about. I guess I'm always harping on the longing, but how that yearning, how the longing, how the country beyond feeds into the living of daily life. And I'm going to read one more quote because
Good.
I don't know when she wrote this, but I like it. My present hope is twofold. I want to go deeper into the mystical knowledge of God, and I want that knowledge to govern my daily life. I had a good deal of pride and anger to overcome, and at times my progress is heartbreakingly slow. Yet I think that I am going somewhere, by God's grace, according to plan. My present tasks are to look after my children and my husband and my garden and my house. So this was before she got divorced and everything. And perhaps to serve God in books and letters as best I can. And my reward is a happiness such as I never dreamed possible. In his will is our peace. So just the fact that she
Why
wrote
wouldn't
that.
you want to talk to her?
Yeah, and I think that is where she and Betsy would relate. And this is all coming together.
Yeah, because
For me.
Betsy was like you were saying, like the consummate, like hospitality, and then Joy is talking about the garden. Yeah, I'm tracking with her. But you get another pick now.
Do I?
You
Already?
do. That's the nature of the Serpentine draft. So now, just so we're clear,
okay.
with the third pick.
Yes.
Wow, time really flies when you're having fun, doesn't it? As all of you listeners can probably guess, we are nowhere near our fantasy pub table draft ending. In fact, we're about halfway done at this point, so rather than give the whole episode to you at once, we thought we'd blow this out into a two-part fantasy pub table extravaganza. So stay tuned for next time when we have the exciting conclusion, and you have me maybe ruin my pub table draft with some wildcard picks, but that's a teaser for next time. You'll have to listen for that. In the meantime, thank you all for listening, and let's close out, as always, with a St. Anselm quotation. He says, "No one will have any other desire in heaven than what God wills, and the desire of one will be the desire of all, and the desire of all and of each one will also be the desire of God." Till next time, everybody.